Bienvenidas, bienvenidos. We had the opportunity to spend a few days in Tuscany and want to share a little bit about the history of the beautiful area in northern Rome. We want to share a little bit about the history and some wonderful books to recommend. But first, of course, this is Latina Literati. The word Tuscany is derived, of course, from Etrusca, the Etruscan people who lived in Etruria that made up the land between the Arno and the Tiber rivers. And at their height, they really did take up most of what we now know as northern Italy. So that would be Umbria and Tuscany and Campania and Lazio. And so there's still a lot that we don't know about the Etruscans, but what we do know is that there was a fair bit of trade with the Egyptians. There's a lot of overlap on customs and the dress and some architecture. And the Romans attempted to kind of swallow them up through marriage and through treaties and through, of course, military campaigns as well. So really fascinating people. At the Etruscan museums throughout Tuscany, you can see some wonderful artifacts, what is left, what we can still enjoy. Another example of what happened to the Etruscan art in 1540, the Pope then had 7,000 pounds of Etruscan bronze statues melted in order to decorate churches. So that's just an example of how another group comes in and just disseminates an entire swath of cultural heritage to be used for a higher purpose according to their perspective. So places like Orvieto and Volterra, which are towns that were Etruscan, have museums with beautiful pieces, sarcophagi, amazing jewelry, pottery. You really can see the scenes of daily life of the Etruscan people, and they were quite bon vivants. They really enjoyed life and were much freer than the Romans, and so there's kind of a pull back and forth between, as these cultures kind of clash, what values will survive. And so they definitely enjoyed feasting and partying, and they were much more libertine, so to speak, than the Romans. So as you take a look at what we have of the remains of the Etruscan people, again, we're talking about 1,000 BC to about 100 BC. So it's a long time, it's a millennia that the Etruscan people really were the inhabitants of this whole area of northern Italy. Beautiful, beautiful architecture, and a lot of what we think of as Greek and Roman was also Etruscan. Things like Colosseums, the famous architectural columns, all sorts of things that we just, in our normal kind of review of history, think, oh, that was Greek or that was Roman. But it was also actually Etruscan, and you see the hairstyles and you see the way that people dressed, and so it's very, very similar. Even their alphabet. The Etruscan alphabet is so close to our own, to the modern day alphabet. You just see the links of where we descended from the Western alphabets because it's all right there. I mean, just look at it. It's just so close to the letters that we use today. So as Rome starts to push up against the Etruscan Empire and starts to make treaties, and through marriages, especially among the ruling families, they just start to kind of take over. Rome really gets to adopt this hugely developed group of people, and so they really do form the basis of the Roman, for example, transportation infrastructure, the agriculture, the mining, just all sorts of arts, pottery, and so many different aspects that we consider part of the great Roman Empire were actually Etruscan. So I think it's really important to identify and to recognize that Rome didn't start in a vacuum. It inherited a very, very highly developed infrastructure and civilization that it basically took over from the Etruscans, who had a lot to do with the Greeks and the Phoenicians. So you have, and the Carthaginians. So you have a lot of different peoples. It's not just one group that comes up with the wheel, for example. I mean, there's a lot of groups, and there's interchange, and there's trade and commerce and exchange of ideas. So a lot of people are kind of moving in the general direction, for example. The towns that were Etruscan, these beautiful towns in Tuscany, are today made of this shimmering sand-colored stone, rose sand-colored stone, and it is there where you'll find the museums where you can see some of the sarcophagi and the other artworks that the Etruscans left behind, or at least that have survived down to our time. But let's speak a bit about modern Tuscany. Modern Tuscany is, of course, known for its rolling hills, its agriculture, its cypress-lined roads of cypress trees, and, of course, its olive groves and its wine vineyards. And in fact, there is something called a Super Tuscan wine. And the Super Tuscan wine, in the 1970s, they started to experiment. A Super Tuscan wine is basically a wine that is grown in Tuscany of non-traditional Tuscan varieties, aka French. But other varieties were brought in, and so these new Super Tuscan wines are considered some of the best in the world. And the land upon which they're grown is some of the most valuable agricultural real estate on earth. So, of course, what you grow, the varieties you grow is important, but also, of course, the land has to be just right, and you have to have the right climate, the Mediterranean climate, for these wines. But what I thought was wonderful when having dinner with friends, the traditional thing to say is, serve me something that was bottled a kilometer away from here. So the closer to the vineyard that you are, kind of the more special the wine should be that you're having with dinner. I thought that was quite funny. But Tuscany is a wonderful place. Very grateful to the friends that made this visit available. This video is dedicated to Vito and Anton. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much for making the visit possible to your beautiful home. And so now on to my favorite part of the video, the book recommendations. Obviously, because we don't have a lot of information from the Etruscan time, there aren't a lot of historical novels, but there are novels that overlap, that have Etruscan characters and Roman characters. And so what I'm recommending to you today, the 3 books I'm recommending to you today, are from that time. Fascinating historical novels. You just really get a sense of what life was like at that time. The first, of course, is the classic, because it is an absolute classic of the ancient world in terms of historical novels, is The King Must Die by Mary Renault. And this is this book has been around for decades, and it is really just a classic to get a sense of what life was like in the ancient world. The second book I'm going to recommend is called The Wedding Shroud by Elizabeth Storms. Fascinating book because it takes life in the ancient world from the perspective of a woman who needs to navigate the ancient world. And in the Roman world, women were basically properties of their fathers or brothers and then their husbands. But in the Etruscan world, they actually had much more freedom, and she is to be wed, the main character is to be wed to an Etruscan nobleman. This is the way that many of the societies just joined together. They kind of married into each other, and is quite afraid of how loose and how wild the Etruscan society is. So in that sense, it's kind of fun to take a look at historical fiction, but based on what we know of the Etruscan civilization today. And the third book that I'm going to recommend today is The Forgotten Legion by Ben Kane. And this is the story of an Etruscan gladiator. So he's fighting in the Roman Colosseums And this is where you get a sense of how some of the Etruscans ended up. Some of them were slaves, some of them were kind of just taken over in military campaigns, integrated into Roman society at all different levels. And so this gives you a completely different perspective and the adventures that he has, not just within the Colosseum, but also without it. Fascinating book, really enjoyed it. Again, these books are so good. Please check your local libraries to see if they may have them so you can borrow them and read them, or your local bookseller who may offer them to you. If perchance you don't have that available, we always include independent booksellers in the description box below for you to purchase them new or used, should you choose to do so. Thank you so much for this joint journey. We would love to hear from you. What are you reading? And let us know what you'd like us to present, because we do that. We do take recommendations. Thank you so much. We would love you to subscribe to Latina Literati, and it would be great to hear from you. So thank you so much. Con mucho cariño, mucho amor, mucha salud. Gracias.